Alex, how was your mother's birthday?
Okay. Yeah, sorry, just waiting for the thing to start.
I don't know if Alex can hear me.
Yes, I can.
How was your mother's 89th birthday? Regularly scheduled meeting. The date is July 14th, 2020, and we'll have the city clerk take the roll, please.
Member Lopez?
Here.
Member Perello?
Here.
Chair Flynn?
Present.
Chair, we have a quorum, and the agenda for this meeting was posted in the City Hall kiosk on Tuesday, July 7th. And the city manager wanted me to note that even though it appears that he's twice with the labels, committee member Perello is borrowing one of his devices.
Very well. All rise for the pledge, please. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Be seated, please. So the first item on the agenda is item C, the consent agenda, and that's the approval of the minutes. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move the recommended action.
Second.
Okay, Madam City Clerk, we have a motion by committee member Perello and a second by committee member Lopez. Vote, please.
Member Lopez?
Yes.
Member Perello?
Yes.
Chair Flynn?
Aye.
The motion carries 3-0.
Thank you very much. Now we're on page 2 of the agenda. We'll move right into reports, which is item D. The very first item is under the Finance Department. The subject, presentation of internal control integrated framework. Recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee receive a presentation on the internal control integrated framework, otherwise known as ICIF. Provide feedback on such framework and associated proposed policies, and give authorization for staff to present the item to the City Council to adopt the following 4 framework implementing policies and approve the ICIF. Number FOL 101, adoption of internal control integrated framework. Number 2, adoption of internal control oversight responsibilities. Number 3, FPOL 1-03 or .03, internal control, finance and governance committee duties and responsibilities. 4, FPOL 1.04, assignment of authority and responsibility for achieving operational, reporting, and compliance objectives. Number 5, City of Oxnard, California internal control integrated framework. And we'll go ahead and start with the presentation by Christine Williams.
Good morning, Finance and Governance Committee. Christine Williams here, Senior Manager of Internal Controls. I want to start the presentation with a little bit of background contents. In July 2018, the City Council was first introduced to the concept of implementing an internal control integrated framework with the acronym ICIF of the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission with the acronym of COSO. The audit findings in the single audit report for fiscal year ending 2015 and subsequent audit reports highlighted the need for the city to adopt an ICIF and to develop internal controls that will help the city safeguard its assets. Michelle, if you could advance the slide to slide number 3. So today I'll be talking to you about internal control. What is an internal control framework and its components, recommended City Council policies and administrative implementation guidelines, and then finally I will wrap up with any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. So there are many different definitions of internal controls. We chose this definition because we thought that it would be the easiest to understand. I'm going to go ahead and just read right off the slide on this one. So internal controls are mechanisms, rules, and procedures implemented by an organization to ensure the integrity of financial and accounting information, promote accountability, and prevent fraud. Internal controls can also help us improve operational efficiency by improving the accuracy and timeliness of financial planning or reporting. I'm very pleased to present this item to the committee today. And if Michelle, you could please advance to slide number 6. So COSO first proposed internal control standards in 1992, and then they revised them in 2013. COSO is made up of a joint initiative of 5 major professional organizations, which you can see there on the right of the slide. James C. Treadway is the name of the first chairman of the commission, and he was also a former SEC commissioner. And this commission was established in 1985 as a result of different fraudulent corporate failures. So they created this commission. These internal control standards are adopted by the Office of Management and Budget. They're also incorporated standards of the federal government. And they're also recommended state and local government standards by the State Controller's Office, and then also as a best practice of the Government Finance Officers Association. Next slide, please. So as I said previously, COSO revised their standards in 2013 as a result of many environmental changes facing governmental entities today. I'll go ahead and just point out a couple of them there. So kind of in the middle of the slide, the demands and complexities and laws, rules, regulations, and standards, use of and reliance on evolving technologies, and then at the very bottom there, expectations related to preventing and detecting fraud. Then this kind of cube here gives you the high level kind of look at what a framework looks like. On the front of the cube here, we have 5 internal control components, which are the first is the control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring activities. These 5 components there help us achieve 3 main internal control objectives, which are at the top of the cube there are operations, reporting, and compliance. And then kind of to the right of the slide there is just the organizational level. So that's what the framework kind of gives you conceptually a picture. Next slide, please. Internal control is comprised of 5 components that work together in an integrated framework. So the 5 components are the control environment. The control environment is the foundation for an internal control system. It's a set of standards, processes, and structures that provide the basis for carrying out internal control activities across the entity. This is where the city council and management set the tone at the top. Risk assessment component. This is where we identify risks, develop controls to eliminate or reduce risk. Control activities. This represents actions management establishes through policies and procedures to achieve objectives, control risk, and threats to achievement. Information and communication. This is where we provide relevant and quality information. And then finally, monitoring of internal controls to assess the effectiveness of internal controls over time, ensure that deficiencies are reported out, and corrective action is timely. Next component, slide, please. So again, we have at the top of the slide here, we have the 5 major components. We have at the policy level, we have 9 different policies that are related to each of the different components. Our first steps today is the control environment, which we are presenting to you, recommending that the adoption of 4 policies here, and I'll talk to you a little bit later about why we're not doing a 5th one. And then at the organizational level, we have 16 management guidelines. And this assists the city manager in developing and deploying control activities throughout the organization. Today, again, the first steps we're presenting these 4 policies, and then later we'll be coming back to the committee and the council, if approved, to go to the risk assessment, control activities, information, and monitoring. But today I'll be talking to you a little bit about what each of them covers. This ICF will also take the city one step further than what has done by the city in prior years by being more comprehensive. We want to make sure that we have all the recommended internal control elements that are recommended in practice. Next slide, please. So we have 9 ICIF recommended policies. Under the control environment, we're asking for feedback and the committee to consider presenting the items to council for adoption. The first policy in your package was the adoption of the internal control integrated framework. This is the use of the recognized and national state internal control standards and practices, and also approval of the thicker packet kind of in your document for us to utilize the guidelines. Policy number 2 is the adoption of the internal control oversight responsibility. This policy is council's oversight responsibility in the development and performance of internal controls. The third policy is the Finance and Governance Committee duties and responsibilities, which this is where the Finance and Governance Committee serves as audit committee in respect to internal controls. And then the fourth policy is assignment of authority and responsibility for achieving operational, reporting, and compliance objectives. This is the delegation of authority to the city manager to develop and deploy control activities throughout the organization. And then the 5th policy we're not recommending today, but it's a performance evaluations of city manager and city attorney, and we're not recommending implementing this policy as is already in place through the Human Resources Department. Next slide, please. This is informational for what's coming for the next policies. We'll have bringing back to the committee regarding the risk assessment, where City Council's risk assessment responsibilities. This is where the City Council will help make policies decisions on risk. Control activities is development and implementation of internal controls. And then information and communication policy. This is where we commit to identify, capture, and exchange timely, accurate, and useful information, and how we will communicate throughout the organization. And then finally, concluding is the 9th recommended policy, which will be brought later at a later time, which is the creation of a monitoring system. This is to ensure that controls are working as intended to achieve objectives and are modified if necessary. This is also where my role really comes into play to help the organization strengthen internal controls and provide oversight and monitoring to ensure that the controls continue to operate as designed. Next slide, please. So in the framework, there are 16 ICIF management guidelines. I won't be going through each one, but I'll just highlight a couple in each component. So again, under the control environment component, we have different guidelines that are recommended that we utilize. So if we go to item number 3, progress reporting, this is where we'll build basic standards for reporting out. Number 4 is integrity and ethics. This is where we'll continue to emphasize the city's commitment to ethical standards and internal control standards and practices. This is where really professional pride and excellence comes into play. And then if we go to item number 6, training, this is where we'll continue to increase the knowledge and skills of our workforce. Next slide, please. Under the risk assessment component, this is where we will be performing periodic risk assessments. Under the control activities, there's guidelines to help us in, I'm going to just cover the first 2 here. Number 1, the development of controls. This is where we'll tailor controls to the actual city of Oxnard's specific risks, organizational capacity, and available resources. And number 2 is future control activities. We need to make sure that we factor in certain criteria when designing control activities, such as risk, objectives, materiality, significance, likelihood, etc. We'll be utilizing reasonable standards and level of effort there. Next slide, please. Information and communication. Again, this is where we will identify, capture, and exchange timely and accurate and useful information, as well as how we communicate throughout the organization. And then finally, concluding with monitoring guidelines. These are responsibility and actions. Below are some of the ways we'll be doing some monitoring. We'll have the ICIF review, where the guidelines recommend reviewing it every 4 years. We'll have the audit committee in respect to internal controls. We also have monitoring by other outside auditors and consultants. And then we already have our hotline, the whistleblower hotline that we already have established. In this area too, we may, depending on the significance of the item, we may monitor at a transaction level, or we may just do analytical reviews, depending on the severity of what we think we need to monitor. Next slide, please. Adoption of these council policies and the ICF are only really the first steps. The city will continue to build and emphasize on its internal control system using the ICF over a period of years, so really the work will evolve. For them to be effective, the city needs to commit time, skills, technology, and appropriate financial resources. Adoption of these policies and guidelines will not be sufficient to change results. Internal control is ultimately a process of people, collaboration, and where commitment of resources and accountability will be required. This is our ICIF next steps. So after today, the committee would provide us feedback on the 4 policies and approval of the ICIF. If that is recommended, we'd like to go to City Council on September 1st. Then our next component we'd like to move to is the risk assessment component, and we'd like to present that to the committee on December 8th. And then after the committee gives us feedback, we'd like to present that to the City Council on January 5th, 2021. Next slide, please. And then finally, we'll conclude with the recommendation again that the Finance and Governments Committee, you just received the presentation on the internal control framework. If you could provide us any feedback on the framework and the associated 4 proposed policies. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much for the comprehensive presentation. The city clerk has told me that she doesn't have speaker cards. I just want to double check. Madam City Clerk, are there any speaker cards for this item?
No, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, we'll start with Committee Member Perrello. If you have any questions, Committee Member Perrello.
Thank you very much for the presentation. The most and will follow along with this. Bringing in new employees, I can imagine there would be a criteria of what kind of competence they have to have. How do we make sure that the current staff is at that same level?
I'm sorry, you cut out the first part of there.
Okay, I'll start
Mind
again.
repeating?
Okay, this is very impressive. It's a lot of technical and everything, but it's exactly what you said. It's the personnel and their personal ethical thing about doing the right job. My question is, with this information and with these new standards that we have, I assume when we bring in new employees, there will be some sort of testing to find out if they're aware of what this is and competent in going forward. How do we check the current employees? Do we have any weaknesses with current employees that we can train them and bring them up to speed so that they're right hitting the ground running with this new information? And I asked this question only because you mentioned the federal government started it with the treadway because of the shenanigans that happen in the corporate world. We still have problems happening in the corporate world. So there are ways around. For every rule, there's a figure guy that can figure out how to break the rule and get around it till he's caught. How do we make sure that is a little bit better in our system?
Yeah, so actually the ICIF here has really great guidelines and elements. We don't have to always use every single one of them, but I think it has really good, like when you talked about first the new employees, we can when we get to the component of control activities, that's where we develop and deploy these things so we can make sure that on the new, even in the recommendations of the guidelines, they suggest, with new employees, maybe having certain documentation so we can, provide them. And then our existing employees is what your really question was that we want to just make sure that we'll have training, we'll provide the same training to them. And as we develop and control these control activities throughout the organization, we need to use all of these guidelines, which are the best standards, to make sure that it's communicated to everyone. So our current employees, we're developing, continuing with training. We're exposing them to the CSMFO conferences, GFOA. We're trying to get our workforce up to speed as quick as possible on knowledge and skills, and it's just a constant improvement that we'll always do. We'll never stop. We'll continually be presenting them with new knowledge, the latest information, the latest controls out there.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that comes to mind is we have made a commitment to move forward with new software and stuff. The questions in the various different staffs, there were issues that some knew how to use certain software and some were comfortable with that. The old software didn't work out. That stuff is being resolved in your mind, and will that tie into this?
So yeah, so one of the things, systems are the highest level internal control. So that will help, the years of technology has helped organizations deploy all of these different control activities already. They're automated. So that would be really great for us to take advantage of, all of these what have changed, technologies that have changed in 30 years, for the systems that they already have these internal control bases set in the actual controls themselves. So we will make sure that as we're going through each component, when we look at a control, we have to factor in every single component, look at all of these guidelines, and making sure that we do a thorough job to make sure that we're not missing any area when we're trying to do it. And there'll be a process over a period of years. So we will, when we get to, we have training on the ERP system. We will be designing them right now. We're really doing that, which is really great because the kind of key staff in there is seeing how we currently do things. And then we're looking at how we can improve things in the future. So it's really good because we can say, hey, where are all these manual processes? And where can we automate this processes? So we're actually in the process of doing that right now. And then we'll have training for those employees that are coming in new. Everybody will be trained on the new ERP system.
Okay, thank you very much. My last question on slide 10, on the third bullet point, it says the Finance and Governance Committee duties and responsibilities. And I believe I heard the Finance and Governance Committee now will act as an audit committee. What does that mean?
So that means that there's certain things. So we, as you can see in the policy, it says that we want to make sure that the Finance and Governments Committee has the appropriate education experience. If you don't have it as well, then we can have consultants come in to offer additional experience that you would like to know. Also, we'll be looking at identifying risks in that area. You'll be helping us set policy related to the risk, how we identify risk, our tolerance and appetite to risk. So those are some of the key components in the oversight. And we have it kind of laid out there in the policy.
Okay, that sounds good, because I would just make one recommendation on this.
Sure.
Part. If we're going to have this Finance and Governance Committee act as the audit committee, there should be some mandated training that the people that serve on this committee, myself included, know what the hell we're doing, and
Okay.
And are held accountable for what we were trained and taught to, brought up to speed. Just the same thing I'm asking of the employee, that the council members in the same boat. That's my only. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee Member Lopez.
Thank you. I think Bert Perello, or Councilmember Perello, he was reading my mind with pretty much all the questions that I had, and in particular, his initial question about how we, or what stood out about the presentation is not just about adopting these policies, but it's how we maintain them. How do we keep staff trained? So I think if we can just make sure to have that information detailed when it does go to council, I think that would be helpful. And I also follow in the question about our committee. If we are going to have that responsibility as the audit committee, I want to make sure that I'm prepared and trained with the information, so I can do the job as appropriately as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to do is just, for those members of the public that might be listening, I like to always try to contextualize this presentation that was just given by Christine Williams on internal controls. And what we need to understand is this process of establishing really internal controls and the whole framework that was just presented came about as a result of an evaluation of our organization starting, I think, about 4 years ago. And probably about 80% of all the deficiencies that were found lied in the area of internal controls. And so when we talk about the possibility of fraud in limited instances or just making mistakes, or it could be a whole host of things, internal controls are just such a fundamental element of any accounting system. And when you're dealing with the kind of money that we're dealing with, having this system, a robust system, is so important. And so what I like to say to Christine Williams and to the committee members, the city manager, and those listening, we're really on track, and I'm really impressed with this. This is where we needed to be 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And some of the fraudulent and illegal activities that took place in the city of Oxnard dating back maybe 20 and 30 years ago that were exposed about a decade ago, hypothetically, those transgressions, I would call them, would have never taken place, or would have been less likely to take place had there been a robust system of internal controls. But the system was so lax and with so little oversight that these transgressions were allowed to take place. So that's just a quick contextualization about this presentation, what it means to the committee. So what I wanted to say to my fellow committee members and to the staff is that certainly training is an important component of this. I have no accounting training and this thing with internal controls and everything else. But I think that even though I think that's important, I think we always have to remember what the job of a member of a city council is, and that is policy making. And then we're more or less the oversight of the oversight, right? That's what we are. And So it's kind of a checks and balances. So I think, the job of the council, and it's laid out in this report, the job of the committee first, and then the city council is better determining risk assessment, the assessment of risk, the evaluation then of that. And then this, what I really like is this monitoring system. And that's probably going to be my only question, is about the monitoring system, maybe in a little bit more detail. How is that set up? I would imagine it's somewhat hierarchical, and then finally, what's important, both by the policymakers, the city council members, is information and communication. This is so critical and so important, because when it comes to transparency in government, it's that we need to be able to take the information and we need to effectively communicate this information, not only to the rest of the city council and the body of government, but to the people that we're serving in this city. They need to understand that we now have and are in the process of implementing a rigorous process of internal controls. And this is going to, Mr. City Manager, members of the committee, and staff members, it's going to get us even further along the road of trust in government. That's what this is all about. This is about trust in government. It's about a higher level of competency when it comes to the managing of the public's money. That's what this is all about. So I just want to say I'm really excited about it. Normally the topic of internal controls is not a very exciting topic, I have to admit. It's not particularly exciting, but it's really exciting when it gets translated to communicating to the public. You know what? We had these things happen in our government. We're not only are we rectifying them, but we're making sure and we're putting in a process called internal controls, so that the likelihood of this ever happening again is so minimal. And I get excited about this because I lived through, and I know Councilman Perello was a community activist at the time, a watchdog, and so I can attribute in large part to this isn't just the genesis of the staff, former city manager Greg Nyhoff, former the chief financial officers, our current financial officer, but this has to do with people like Councilman Perello, who before he was elected were calling for this accountability, this more robust system. They didn't really mention internal controls, but it was how to make sure that the public's money is being spent properly, is accounted for, and there's no malfeasance. Let me use that word, malfeasance in government, that we're getting rid of malfeasance and we're going to put it to rest, period. And we need to remain vigilant during that process. But Ms. Williams, I'm sorry for that lengthy commentary, but I'm still kind of living through that experience that I went through with what happened in city government. How does the monitoring system work? How would that work?
So on the monitoring system, I said maybe earlier how we have different, right? We have the ICIF, it asks us to review it, recommends the guidelines every 4 years. We also have the auditors reviewing. We also have any external, we have the internal control, right? The whistleblower hotline is another way of monitoring. As well as now, depending on once we look at our risk assessment, monitoring will be reporting out. We'll be looking at the basics of a reporting structure, depending again on the severity of what we feel is a risk. And once we identify those risks and our risk appetite and tolerance, then we may go down to the transaction level. If we feel it's material and significant, we may do monitoring at that level. Sometimes just monitoring happens at the analytical level. We just, we do a lot more. We really need a lot more analytical review here. So, it would be looking at budget to actual. Sometimes it can be simple as that monitoring. And so we'll be looking at the guidelines for everything that they recommend that we do and make sure that, everything will be based on certain criteria, the materiality, the reasonableness, the effectiveness of it, the significance, the likelihood. So all of those things will have to be taken into play as we design the monitoring system. How often are we going to report to you? That's a monitoring control. Like right now, we do the corrective action plan, right? That's a form, and we report out to the committee and the council every 6 months. So that's a plan, and that's a form of monitoring that we continue to look at it. We continue to do improvements. So there's a lot of work that we'll be looking at. It's a responsibility of the city, all employees, and we'll be going down to the operation level. We'll be monitoring at the financial reporting. Some monitoring is timeliness, obviously, of like bank reconciliations, other processes, other controls. We want to make sure that they're timely so that we're reporting accurately. We'll be able to, review things with the employees, some of the other sometimes vendor material transactions. We might look at that depending on how on our accounts payable. So there's all different criteria. We'll always look at the criteria first and then suit the monitoring to the needs of the city based on the risks that we feel are the most significant.
Thank you very much. And one final quick question. Where would you say, Ms. Williams, we are overall in the big picture of things? Where are we in terms of our implementation of internal controls as a percentage? If 100% is, everything is, everything, the staff is in place, the policies and procedures are in place, all the divisions, the role of the committee, the role of the council, the role of staff, the role of outside auditors, it goes on and on and on, this very elaborate network. Where are we right now to get members of the public that are listening, the big view of our completion of this process towards getting to 100%?
So we still have a couple of years to do it. If I'd say we're about 60% because we do have, some of the past problems that we had were lack of documentation. We're significantly increasing on that. An outdated financial system, as I mentioned before, that will really bring us up to speed. We're not taking advantage of with our 30-year-old system that doesn't have specific internal controls already built into it. So it is going to be over a period of years. Also, I think since I've been here, I can tell you I started with the city in 2015. And a day will not go by. I mean, you will never, ever have every internal control covered, but we will do everything that we can do. We're on a constant improvement basis. Since the day I arrived here, we'll continuously improve. And that will never, ever stop. But as far as getting this framework, we want to make sure that we have every element and component a more comprehensive internal control. The city already has internal controls. This is just us making sure that we're covering every element, emphasizing ethics, competency, and accountability throughout the organization, just making sure that we're fine-tuning everything, making sure we're taking advantage of the most recent technologies, making sure that the staff and our workforce is trained and skilled, making sure that every single factor that we can do to eliminate and reduce and minimize risk as much as possible for the city. So because we have that outdated financial system, that's a big percentage because that's the highest level of internal controls. And then we want to get the workforce up to date, get it out more communication channel. And we want to make sure the trust of the public, we want to make sure that we're producing, quality, relevant, useful, and accurate information. So we've been, actively working on that. We're actively reducing our audit findings. We didn't have any material weaknesses this year. So it's going to always be an ongoing thing. But I think once we get the major system in place, we make sure that we've reviewed and analyzed and developed these elements that the framework is recommending. It just makes for a stronger, more reliable entity, and just that we have, we're taking advantage of all of these features. So It will never stop. Improvement will be continuous and always ongoing, not just for a couple of years. It continues on forever. And we will just continue and continue to make sure that we improve the organization to the best of our abilities.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, may I make?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Number one, thank you, Ms. Williams, for your presentation. But Mayor, I have a couple of points. I'm looking at the very first sentence of this recommendation. It said provide feedback. I want to make sure my feedback is incorporated in this thing. And I have no doubt that they've already taken it, but I'd like to use this example. We have a department, human resources. We have a departments in public safety. We have departments in public works, and we have employees. And I've asked that, how are we going to make sure the employees are brought up to speed on the training? Sometimes I don't know about the city, but sometimes in various departments, they'll have a list of the people that work for the employee company, and there'll be a box. Have they taken the latest training? And everybody and anybody walking by can see if the person is up to speed on the training. In public safety, I'll use as an example. I don't want to go to a fire as I'm a fireman with the guy next to me hasn't finished the training on how to handle whatever it is that we get into. They self-monitor, they push each other to make sure they get the training. I would like to make sure that we consider doing something like that, where everybody in the department knows who's got the training and who doesn't, and who's short. So we can hold each other accountable, and the department head can be held accountable. Because this gets to my other point. With, say, human resources, we had made concerns and concessions to straighten out the pensions and the buckets and the various benefits, and we still find that we still have some lacking things like that. We need to make sure that the people that are in these positions are trained and know what's going on so that someone is held accountable. Because ultimately the councilmen are held accountable. And this gets to my point, Mayor, that you made, the high level and council members are going to be policy driven. Not in this baby. When this committee is going to be held to be the audit committee, I want those 3 members to know what's going on, because the other 4 members of that council are counting on these 3 members to doing oversight. And it gets to the word that Ms. Williams has used, trust. They're going to trust the 3 members on that committee know what's going on. This particular committee has already had a change in 1 member. And I'm grateful, Ms. Lopez mentioned it. If you come into a committee and you haven't been brought up to speed on what you're supposed to be looking for, especially on the audits, and I'll use myself as an example. I serve on an airport committee, a different agency, but I don't know a damn thing about airplanes other than when I get in one, I want to land in one piece. That's the only thing I know. But I serve on this airport committee. You learn as you go. On this audit thing with what's happened in this past in the city, Mayor, you're absolutely right. We need to have people that are aware, interested, and held accountable by the other council members. And that's my comments. And I hope that someone will review my comments and make sure they're included when this goes to council. And again, Ms. Williams, thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. And the item is that we receive the presentation and provide feedback, which we've done, and give authorization to the staff to present the item to the city council. Do we have a motion to forward this to the city council?
Move the recommended action.
I'll second it.
Okay, Madam City Clerk, we have a motion by Committee Member Lopez and a second by Committee Member Perrello. The vote, please.
Member Lopez?
Yes.
Member Perrello?
Yes.
Chair Flynn?
Aye.
The motion carries 3-0.
Okay, we'll now go to Information Technology Department, which is item 2 on page 2 of the agenda. The subject, response to grand jury report, quote, cybersecurity strategies for cities in Ventura County, end quote. Recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend the City Council authorizes the mayor, the city manager, and the chief information officer to respond on behalf of the City Council to the grand jury report entitled Cybersecurity Strategies for Cities in Ventura County, dated May 21st, 2020, in the form included as the attachment titled Response to Grand Jury Report Form. And we'll have Keith Brooks give the presentation, please.
Good morning, Keith Brooks, Chief Information Officer for the City of Oxnard. And good morning, Chair Flynn and members Lopez and Perrello. Here speaking this morning with Ken Austin, our IT Manager of Systems Architecture, and Raja Bamrongpong, who's our IT Manager of Enterprise Applications, with our response to the grand jury report that we received May 21st that is titled cybersecurity strategies for cities in Ventura County. I'll run through these 10 recommendations quickly, and we can have anyone from the pool here answer your questions at the end. The first two have to do with cities establishing secure web addresses through the use of HTTPS. That's the little lock symbol you'll see at the top of a website when you visit a web page. We agree, we already have that in place, and we provided a couple of examples. The second item, the grand jury recommends that cities establish trustworthy web addresses following the California DOT, Department of Technology domain name taxonomy guidance. We agree with that also, and will require further analysis in the upcoming year. The next two items, the grand jury recommends that the city utilize free federal and federally aligned cybersecurity services. One of those is CISA, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. And we agree with both of those recommendations, 3 and 4, and provided verification that we are participating. Item 5 is with regard to the city taking advantage of discounted services and cooperative purchasing programs. We agree with that, and working with finance and purchasing, we have been leveraging those for numerous years. Item 6 recommends that cities develop personnel cost-saving opportunities and create cybersecurity talent pool by recruiting interns or graduate students. We obviously agree with that as well. I established an MOU with the Ventura County Community College District a couple of years ago, and we've had about 18 interns go through that program already. And this fall we'll have more depending on COVID. We'll see how that works out. Item 7 is with regard to the city maintaining good vendor relations. The CISA organization mentioned previously is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, federal agency that we've applied for participation with and will leverage going forward to review contracts. And we also noted that cybersecurity insurance is already secured with all of our technology-related contracts. Recommendation number 8 is that the city clearly identify its expenses in the city's budget. We agree, and we already do that. You can check ours out starting on page 135, the city's budget. Item 9 recommends the city develop and test cyber incident response, recovery, and business continuity plans. We have those already available as a draft form, and we'll be completing those this fall, so we agree with that one as well. Item 10 recommends that cities implement best practices for teleworking, and we agree that the best practices are appropriate as stated in the recommendation number 10. And then item 11 is simply that we will develop a written plan before December 31st that we are addressing each of these recommendations. And of course, we agree with that, and we'll have that done this winter. So at this point, I know I ran through those quickly. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me or Ken or Raja.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Committee member Lopez, any questions?
Thank you. This is, it's a nice summary on the report, and I'm glad to see that there's, some of these recommendations, or most of them, is something that we already have in practice or that is in the process. So I think, this was positive to see that. Just a question that may or may not, be related to this, related to this, but not sure if you're able to answer that. So it appears that this grand jury report is looking at the technology sites and the information, but what about equipment? Even though it's not addressed in that way, does this report or have we looked at any equipment that would need to be upgraded or looked at as part of protecting the services in the city?
Well, yes, we continually look at that, and that item is not addressed in this report.
Thank you.
Yes, Committee Member Perello.
Yes, thank you for the report. I have a specific question. I believe it will be right along the line of Ms. Lopez's question. On slide number 4, if you can go to it, we have recommendation 05. Grand jury recommends city take advantage of discounted services and cooperative purchasing programs whenever possible. And I'm using this because of a just transpired this morning. Equipment and technology, sometimes the marriage doesn't work as well as it should. And if we are going to get, say, a really good deal by cooperative purchasing something that doesn't blend with what we have, and then it takes a training, or we have to have a, and again, I'm not a tech guy, a boot or a workaround or a patch or a plug or a thingamajig to make the thing work. How do we prevent ourselves from getting into a spot like that? And I will use an example from a Mac to a Chrome to a iPad to a whatchamacallit. How do you get all these things to interface when we are talking about the budgets and the grand jury wants to do a certain thing, but we have limited resources, we have limited staff, and we have a limited training ability and funding for budgeting for training to accommodate all these recommendations? They sound good, but in your professional experience, how do you protect our city?
That's a great question, Committee Member Perello. The way to think about our cooperative purchasing agreements is those are vehicles that we leverage to complete a purchase. They're not vehicles that require us to make a specific purchase. So the decision for what hardware, software, what technology to purchase is made by the IT professionals that we have hired and those that we consult with. And then if we can leverage a cooperative agreement that's federal or local, then we do so to save money. But those agreements don't determine the equipment that we would purchase or the software we would purchase, if that makes sense.
So we are, I hope, I possibly didn't understand it as well as I should have. I hope that we are, I'll use what I'm more familiar with. In the auto industry, some bolt patterns for certain vehicles and certain manufacturers are a certain way on wheels and tires. May standardize size tire, but the wheels are different. There are certain things that fit differently from one brand to another. And when you have various brands, sometimes it is much more efficient to standardize. And that's what I was looking at. Just that we are aware of that and you're taking that into consideration. It sounds like that's what we're doing, but I just want to make sure that in my mind, that's what we're doing.
Yes, that's correct. We do have a
Okay.
stated cloud-first strategy and look to purchase things that align with standard protocols supported by the industry whenever possible, so we don't get stuck with something that only works with specific hardware or specific software or environments. So good point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brooks. Thank you very much. That's all, Mayor.
So my comments are very brief. Mr. Brooks, thank you very much. The grand jury operates separate from the city and all cities and obviously makes recommendations. And I think that it's amazing, but each and every response I'm really satisfied with. And Mr. Brooks, I did want to ask you only about one thing, because I think it's probably one of the areas of growth that the city needs to explore, especially in this time of financial constraints. And that is an internship program. And it says here, and I'm glad it was up here, R6, it says, we've established a memorandum of understanding with the Ventura County Community College District for interns. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, Mayor Flynn, Chair Flynn. It took me a solid year to get an agreement established with the VCCCD, and that was probably 3 years ago that was signed and then renewed, I think, within the last year. It's difficult to get any two government organizations to agree on anything, but it has been successful. Since then, I said we've had about 18 students go through the organization, a couple that we have made job offers to. Recruitment is very difficult in the IT realm, and it's hard for us to be competitive with private industry. So this was a way for us to get to some young, fresh talent in the community college district and bring them in, give them some job experience, help them meet some of the minimum requirements to actually apply for a job with the city in the future. as well. So we're pursuing the same thing with CSU CI, but that's more recent, and we haven't had any interns yet from that college.
And I know sometimes, Mr. Brooks, thanks for that explanation. I know sometimes this can be an issue with bargaining units, because bargaining units within any city don't want to see that the city is, in essence, taking away their authorized positions and filling them with, much cheaper labor, and undermining their collective bargaining rights. But how many interns on average are we looking to recruit for things like this? How many interns have you been working with, or are you looking to work with? I'm just kind of curious in the context of your department and how that might be further replicated throughout the city.
Well, it depends on your bandwidth, of course. And first to point out, we aren't filling existing approved union positions. These are additional interns that we're bringing in with the approval and working with the human resources for extra help and for a specific area. We define the coursework with the professors in advance of the semester beginning.
Wow.
The professors select these students that they want to apply for these internships. We go through the full formal interview process with them so they get experience being on interview panel. And then we have anywhere from 1 to 3. I think we had as many as 6 in one semester, but typically 1 to 3 is about all we can handle with the additional workload that they require for training and shadowing of existing IT personnel.
I'm sorry, and that was the only thing I didn't hear. You can only handle 1, or did you say 3 at a time?
We handle between 1 and 3 per semester.
Okay.
We have had as many as 6, but 1 to 3 is much more manageable with the workload that we have.
I understand. Well, let me just say I'm really impressed with that, and I'm sure there are many other areas of the city where we have these interns, but it's always been a big interest of mine, and I hope and I know it takes people to manage the interns, and I've had interns myself in the summertime, and you have to have somebody managing them. Once you come up with projects, somebody's kind of overseeing what they're doing. So I understand it is also a capacity issue, but I like the fact that, again, we're not replacing positions, we're filling those authorized positions, and we're adding these interns to our actually, and I'm hoping at some point to build capacity. So thank you very much, Mr. Brooks. I'm really, really satisfied and happy with these recommendations and responses to the grand jury.
Thank you.
May I ask a question, Mayor?
Yes, Committee Member Perrella.
Mayor, I want to thank you very much for delving into this area right here. Mr. Brooks, I didn't know that much about the intern thing. High compliments to your department, you and your department. I actually think this would be something that we should have possibly on a future city council agenda, bringing people up to speed, because there's got to be moms and dads at home thinking, hey, I could get my kid in this or somehow. High compliments. Training somebody to take an interview panel, having professors involved, teach them how to apply for a job. Those are life skills people will never forget, and they're priceless. One question I do have: are we dealing with Oxnard College or Ventura or Moore Park, or is it all, or are we focusing on Oxnard?
The Ventura Community College District is the organization we deal with. The memorandum of understanding is signed specifically with Oxnard College. Their requirements are different for every campus of the Ventura College District. Moore Park has different requirements. They have different courses. Each college has different areas of expertise. The Oxnard College has a networking department that is really strong, and that's an area of need for us. So that's the one we have the MOU with currently.
Again, thank you, and I apologize. I didn't know more about this. I'm really grateful the mayor asked the question, because this is makes you feel good as a council member that we're doing something like this to help somebody get a chance to get a foot in the door somewhere, whether here or somewhere else down the road, and they may never forget the city of Oxnard and have good feelings and warm feelings for the help they got. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well. And any additional questions by Councilmember Lopez?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you so much.
Okay, very good. And Madam City Clerk, I know you haven't indicated as such, but just to double check, no speaker cards, is that correct?
Right, we didn't have any speakers, but we did receive an email from Debbie Mitchell that was forwarded to you.
That's correct. Thank you very much. And so the recommendation is that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend the City Council authorizes the mayor, city manager, and chief information officer to respond on behalf of the City Council. So do we have a vote for that, a recommendation or a motion?
I'll move the recommended action.
Second.
Okay. All right, Madam City Clerk, we have a motion by Councilmember Perrello, Committee Member Perrello, and a second by Committee Member Lopez.
Member Lopez?
Yes.
Member Perrello?
Yes.
Chair Flynn?
Aye.
The motion carries 3-0.
Very well. We're to the last item of the agenda, on the agenda for today, and that's under the City Manager Department. The subject, annual delegation of investment authority and investment policy. And the recommendation is that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend the City Council adopt a resolution. 1, delegating investment authority to the City Treasurer, and 2, adopting the fiscal year 2020-2021 investment policy for the city. Yes, and I would imagine we'll start with the City Manager, or?
This is Sherry Klima. I'll be doing the presentation. It's a very short presentation, Mayor.
Thank you.
We just would, I do not have the clicker. 1 second. Is it up there? 1 moment, please. So we recommend that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend that the Council adopt a resolution delegating the investment authority for 1 year to the City Treasurer and adopting the fiscal year 2021 investment policy for the city. And so there is a government code section that is quoted on the slide that explains that the authority of the City Council to invest or reinvest funds of the local agency may be delegated for a 1-year period, and that's renewable every year. But it may be delegated by the City Council to the City Treasurer. So the attached resolution delegates to the City Treasurer, the resolution 10455, which was adopted in 1992, delegated this authority to the City Treasurer to invest and reinvest surplus city funds. And then the proposed resolution renews this investment authority pursuant to Resolution 10455. This has been renewed annually since 1992, I believe. It was definitely renewed last year, and we're looking to renew it again. And then pursuant to another government code section also cited on this next slide, the Treasurer or Chief Fiscal Officer may annually render to the City Council a statement of investment policy. The City Treasurer prepared an investment policy in 2018. Council adopted it again in 2019 in the summer, and this year we conferred with the Treasurer, and he told us that we can use the same investment policy and just change the years. We did change the years listed in there. Our city attorney found some changes to state law. We didn't change the policy in any way, but the state law is quoted as an attachment at the end of the policy, so he updated those state laws to be current state laws. And then there were 2 references to the SunGuard system, which is the current ERP system, and we changed those to just be more general software references. Otherwise, this is exactly identical to last year's investment policy, and we're asking you to adopt that. I note that the City Treasurer is here if he'd like to add anything. He is
Mr.
pointing
Molina?
at the Assistant City Treasurer.
Oh, Assistant City Treasurer.
If
Okay.
either of you would like to add anything, make any statements, I'd like to just make that available to them. Otherwise, that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, I'd like to start. Did you say, Ms. Klima, that we also had the Treasurer and the Assistant Treasurer?
They are both in the audience, and we have the Treasurer up at the microphone now.
Okay, Mr. City Treasurer. Mr. Molina, please.
The change in SunGuard is because we're moving from the existing software, which is HTE, to the new software, which is Tyler. And in doing so, the software that Tyler uses is different than SunGuard. We hope it's easy to transition to. And we appreciate the update that the city attorney's made to the particular statutes that are involved. Other than that, we're open to any questions. The Assistant City Treasurer is here. She has a detailed knowledge of the investments. We'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Molina, Mr. City Treasurer. And we'll go to now to Committee Member Lopez if she has any questions.
Thank you. I just have one question in terms of, how much, what the role of the council is in the investment process. If it's something that the city treasurer or assistant city treasurer needs further input throughout the year from the council on where to invest money. Is that something that is necessary? If that can be clarified either by our assistant city manager or city attorney, what that means and what the role of the city council is throughout the year once this policy is adopted.
Mr. Chair and Member Lopez, the delegation statute indicates that the investment authority is the council's to delegate. So conceivably there could be a council-run investment process. That would be somewhat unwieldy, however, because of the Brown Act issues involved with having to collectively make a decision at a public meeting. There is no exception that I'm aware of that would allow the council to confer about making various investments on a regular basis outside of a public meeting. So soliciting input from a majority of the council is improper under the Brown Act. The district attorney has advised that that should not be done. Council's response, if a majority were to respond, would be the Brown Act violation. So my recommendation is that to the extent there's any input sought, that it be done at some sort of public meeting, or that the council direct staff to look at other alternatives for management of investments if council input is needed.
Thank you. That helps to clarify and just to make sure that that is something that is understood by the public, that there is no private conversations of how money is invested in the city, and if something is being directed by council, it would be happening in a public meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee Member Perrello.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. I was going to ask, I received an email recently, what would you do if you had $10 million to invest today? And it's the short-term money for the city of Oxnard. I believe that's what you're addressing, Mr. Fisher. But I serve on another board, the Ventura Regional Sanitation District Board, and there's been often questions with respect to the investments of that agency's funds, and it's social questions. And one of the questions, and we could be addressing the same thing here, do we want to invest in the tobacco industry? Do we want to invest in gun business? Do we want to invest in petroleum service or oil companies? That would be one question. But a question I think that would be better, I know the city treasurer, beg your pardon, excuse me. I know the city treasurer has in the past has asked, for volunteers to be involved and give advice. There is a question of people having to fill out 700 forms. There is a perception that somebody would give recommendation to personally benefit. But I think that it is way past time for the largest city in Ventura County to pick itself up by the bootstraps and figure out there's a lot of smart people in this community. Some wealthy, some not. Some extremely educated, some not. But all of them having a degree of common sense. And there is an opportunity for people to make advice and suggestions to the treasurer. I know he's been acceptable to having people come and touch base with him, but I think it might benefit the city council in a whole to have some people with expertise just give some advice once in a while. It would help the council, it helped the residents, I think, and it would help the treasurer's office. If we have somebody that, for example, I'm just using for example, we had an individual such as Mr. Kevin Riper living in our community with the background and the training and the expertise and everything that he has, and he could share some of his training, not telling you to bet on the red on a roulette table or the third horse in the fifth race at Del Mar, giving you some expertise of what he knows, what he's learned through his experience to benefit our city. I feel it would be tremendously helpful for our community. And I hope that we will consider that as a body, somehow incorporating that in with the Brown Act, Form 700, conflicts of interest and all that stuff, because no matter what, if an individual with the skill and training of the one that I just mentioned lives in this city, they will also suffer the pains and arrows that come with mistakes made by the city, where they could also benefit for some good that came out of advice that was taken by the elected officials in investments of their funds. I hope that's clear. If it's not, I'll take any questions about what I might mean, but that's all I have, Mayor.
Councilman
Thank you very-
Perillo, if I can add to,
Yes.
I think I understand what you're asking, and Councilwoman, or Chairman, Chairperson Vianney Lopez, what I've done over the last 3 years is to try to keep the council engaged in the investments as well as city staff. There is no short list of the number of brokers that call Eden and me almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and wanting us to buy their product. They have a special product that just came online today. You really have to take advantage of it or you're going to lose that opportunity. What we want to do is to be able to make the council aware that we want to receive any viable information on the types of investments that we buy. Kevin and I were looking at each other, and I'm always willing to have him read his crystal ball, and then he throws it back at me. We're both trained in that subject, in that area, but we're certainly not Wall Street investors, or we probably wouldn't be here. Nonetheless, what we are interested in is good, sound information from any member of the public, and council members included, city staff always, because we want to make sure that we're doing the best for the city of Oxnard. And in line with the internal control procedures you just heard about earlier today, that's part of the process in making sure that Phil Molina isn't investing in his uncle's dairy farm back in South Dakota, because that's where money is needed. And it's important to be open and transparent. And to that end, Eden and I and Martha have worked very hard every single month to prepare for the council and to disseminate it to the public a list of every one of the investments we have purchased. We identify the results. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but we want the public to get used to, and the council in particular, and the executive city staff, to receiving this monthly report so that they can demand, whether it's me or any other future city treasurer, that we have the right to know and we demand to know, where did you invest our city money? As you know, we have over $256 million to invest in. God forbid you should come in tomorrow and find out that I invested all of it in a particular corporation that just went belly up. And guess what? Our city is in a lot of trouble now. And to that extent, it's very important that the council and the city staff stay engaged in our investments. So I appreciate the question and the comments, Chairperson Perillo.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's all I got, Jim.
Okay, good. So what I'd like to say is this, is the primary responsibility of treasurers in the state of California, and I've said this before, say it again here at the committee, the primary responsibility of all elected and appointed treasurers is safeguarding the public's money. And in this case, it's safeguarding the public's investments. Mr. Molina, as he stated, as well as the chief financial officer, are trained in the area of investments, but ultimately too, we have an investment advisor. And that investment advisor advises Mr. Molina and will give overviews and give presentations to the city council. I don't mind the idea, and I have never in any way have been against the idea that there are people in the community that have experience that we can rely upon that can help the city treasurer. This is the responsibility of the city treasurer. This is, where I then kind of come back to where there might be sometimes disagreements about what are the roles and responsibilities of the city treasurer. This is the responsibility of the city treasurer. And I like Mr. Fisher's response to this. If the city council wants to open this up and, we work through Brown Act, hurdles and this and that, we can open it up and the city council gets more involved in investments. I don't think that the city council should be involved in that unless it's the city treasurer's decision to give the council some options, and city treasurer might say, look, I've kind of narrowed it down to this. And then he explains it to the city council. And I'm just looking for your kind of affirmation about what it is that I'm about to do. Then I think it's appropriate that the city council, and it's worked out that we take a role. But opening this up to too many people talking about investments is not what I like. I like a much tighter investment framework. We have an investment advisor. We've chosen that investment advisor. That investment advisor advises Mr. Molina. Mr. Molina has a group of people that he kind of has his own checks and balance systems about how he reaches decisions. And sometimes that might include the city council. Often it includes the CFO. But I want to say clearly to my colleagues here that I'm very wary and I'm very, it's not the word isn't concerned, but I'm just really reluctant in any way to say, you open this thing up. So, it's like in the name of transparency that we're going to have every Tom, Dick, and Harry involved in trying to advise the city on how to invest its money. That is not good policy making. That is not good government. So I will go ahead and just ask the council for direction on this item. And it is, number one, delegating the investment authority to the city treasurer and adopting the 2021 investment policy for the city. What's the pleasure of the committee, please?
I'll move the recommended action.
Second.
Okay, Madam City Clerk, we have a recommendation by, or a motion by Committee Member Lopez and a second by Committee Member Pearl.
Member Lopez.
Yes.
Member Perello.
Yes.
Chair Flynn.
Aye.
The motion carries 3-0.
Thank you. Now we have one last item. We do have the Public Works Committee that starts in 11 minutes. Before we take up item E, I just want to say from the planning process that on the very last committee meeting that this committee has scheduled, which is 2 weeks from today, we're going to do a full review of the items for future agendas because the committee is already meeting. So I would, before we even get to that, I would just say that I would hope that the city clerk could get that information to the committee members so that we are, and it'll be on the agenda too, but that, we kind of think it through over the next couple of weeks. I would imagine that agenda is going to be published in 4 days, 5 days, whatever that is. But I just wanted to mention that to my fellow committee members, my request that all the committees take a look at items for future agendas, that be reevaluated, and that the staff be given time over the recess in August to better prepare and, given the direction of the committee members, prioritize which future agenda items need to be incorporated on the schedule. So I'll just ask if there's any for items for future agendas. If there are any comments, we'll start with Committee Member Perillo.
I think it's a good idea. We need to clean the sheets and figure out where we've already taken care of what we haven't, and what is no longer a priority and what is a strong priority, and get it knocked out, knock them off one after another. I agree.
Thank you. Committee Member Lopez?
I think that's a great next step.
Thank you very much. And with that said, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.